Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
And now, the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to the Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Friday, July 17th. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of the Federal Drive, the VA wanted a consistent way to determine police staffing levels. An Inspector General audit found important gaps in the tool meant to make that happen. Plus, runways, hangars, seawalls, and military facilities all start with the same thing: concrete. A former Air Force commander says that's worth paying attention to. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of the Federal Drive. We begin with this. The Pentagon is launching a new health screening initiative that will check for low testosterone as part of the annual physicals for service members ages 30 and older. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says the effort is intended to improve readiness, resilience, and long-term health, while emphasizing that testosterone replacement therapy would be voluntary. Let's listen.
This initiative, it's not about artificial enhancement. It's about restoring and optimizing your natural capabilities, protecting your longevity, and ensuring you have the biological foundation required to sustain the fight.
But the announcement is also raising questions about the medical evidence behind widespread screening and how the policy will be implemented across the force. Federal News Network's Rachel Cohen joins me with more. Rachel, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Terry.
So walk us through this new policy. Do we know yet which troops will be screened or how testing will work, or what happens if someone is found to have low testosterone?
Sure. So there's, a lot of details that have to be worked out with the services, with DHA, that sort of thing. But as of right now, everybody who is age 30 or up across active duty, guard, reserve, men and women will be tested. It'll just become part of the annual, I'm guessing, blood test panel that people will do when they go in for their physicals. And it'll just kind of become part of the medical record.
The Pentagon is framing this as a readiness issue. Is there evidence the department is relying on to argue that identifying and treating low testosterone could improve military performance or long-term health?
So I think something that hasn't gotten a lot of notice, by people who don't pay as much attention to kind of the, longer-term military health issues. I don't think the secretary came out directly and said this in his video, but, operator syndrome, quote unquote, is, it has been around in the special operations community for a long time. And it's, this phenomenon of more people in special ops with low testosterone than, say, other specialties in the military. Or at least that's the perception. And so they've kind of dubbed it, operator syndrome. And so I think this policy, is part of a broader health and fitness push that they want to roll out. But it's also, there's been chatter in the special operations community for a long time about this, saying, our low testosterone, could be caused by, extreme amounts of stress that we are under, just given the combat situations that we're in. And so I think, and people have gotten treated for that, and quality of life has gotten better, health has gotten better. So I think that's sort of the test case for this. And, Hegseth is saying, let's address that. Let's, see if there are other people out there that have a similar issue and, get them what they need.
So we're early on in this. This is a pretty recent announcement, but it seems like implementation might be kind of complicated. How would they conduct these screenings? Who would be eligible for treatment? Does the policy apply equally across all the force, all the branches, both genders?
Yes. as far as we know right now, it would be, like we said before, anybody 30 or older. People under 30 can also opt in if they want. If you're experiencing symptoms that are kind of consistent with low testosterone, extreme fatigue, an array of other things. There are a lot of little policy pieces that go into making this reality. DHA, the services have to be involved. Undersecretary Tata will be involved with writing kind of the implementation memos of, how this interfaces with TRICARE coverage, how it interfaces with deployments and things like that. And that's deployments are a policy piece that will have to get figured out, because right now, if you're somebody who is prescribed a testosterone supplement, you have to get a medical waiver if you're supposed to deploy. So, are we opening up, thousands more people to the possibility that, they could get diagnosed with something? It would be up to them whether to receive treatment or not. And so, you run into questions of, would people postpone treatment for something because they don't want to, add another complication into the already very complicated, deployment run-up? Do they get their prescription and then get the waiver and figure out if they can actually use their product of choice when they go downrange? Because not everything is available. So there's a lot of the nitty-gritty that they have to work out.
Rachel, wasn't hormone therapy part of the concern about continuing to allow trans members to serve?
That was, as in relation to a gender dysphoria diagnosis, that was, the thinking is, if you have to send people overseas, for combat, for, whatever sort of deployment, outside of CONUS, do they have extenuating medical needs? Would they need to regularly take hormone replacement therapy? And, when they started the process of ejecting trans troops last year, they said, no more hormone therapies for people that have these diagnoses.
So what does this policy tell us about how the Pentagon is approaching health and readiness more broadly? Should service members now be expecting other sorts of preventive health initiatives in the future?
Sure. So, this is in line with what we've seen from Hegseth already in sort of framing health and wellness and appearance and things like that as a lethality issue, as a, force readiness issue. So they put out a memo today saying, this is one piece of a broader warfighter health push. They're going to ask the services, what other similar options they have for human performance enhancement. I think that could range from, there's a lot of kind of tech initiatives in that space. There's a lot of things that can qualify as warfighter health, right? So we'll see what else the services try to make the case for, what OSD signs on to, and there could be more.
That's Federal News Network's Rachel Cohen. Rachel will follow up with you as this gets fleshed out.
Thanks, Terry.
You can find her story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, the VA wanted a consistent way to determine police staffing levels. An Inspector General audit found important gaps in the tool meant to make that happen. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network.
Print servers in federal environments create risk and unnecessary complexity. Every new printer, location, or policy adds strain to infrastructure that was never built for today's demands. FedRAMP High Authorized Printer Logic eliminates print servers with a secure cloud-native, zero-trust solution designed for federal IT. With advanced security, centralized control, and simplified management, agencies can modernize print without added burden. See what secure serverless printing looks like. Visit Vasion.com to learn more.
Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. The VA's Inspector General found that a tool designed to determine police staffing levels lacked validation, clear ownership, and consistent use. Those very common problems left facilities without a dependable model to guide their planning and coverage. Joining me to discuss the findings and what happens next is the VA's Inspector General, Cheryl Mason. Ms. Mason, thank you so much for joining me today.
Great to be here, Terry. Thanks.
The VAIG has released a report recently about a staffing tool that supports the police staff. But I think when people think about VA and staffing challenges, they are not thinking police. They're thinking doctors and nurses in VA medical facilities. Just give us a quick background on what VA deals with when it comes to police presence and physical security.
So the VA with the doctors and nurses and medical staff, of course, are extremely important. But, when you're going to a facility, you also want to make sure that you're safe. You want your employees to be safe. And so VA does have a police force. And so that is there to protect the veterans and their family members who come to campuses for treatment, to ensure that they feel safe and to also ensure that our employees are safe. We do have challenges from time to time, on campuses, on VA campuses, whether it's crime or whether it's actions that, we need that deterrence of the VA police force. And so that's why they're there.
Thank you for that. And your office looked at a staffing decision tool that was supposed to help medical centers figure out how many police or what their police staffing model should be. What was the problem that you were trying to examine and solve?
Well, I think that primarily the big problem was the tool was meant really to eliminate the guesswork and give the police chiefs at the various facilities a standard way to assess the security needs and set staffing levels for each of the facilities to provide for enough protection. When you have facilities in urban areas versus very rural, it's going to be a wide range. And so, a standard staffing level of like 30 officers is just not, that might work for something, but not for another, right? And so, but because VA had been very, very much the police were under the jurisdiction of each of the VA medical centers, there was not a centralized basically control for the police force. And so how they determined what the need was from site to site, even though the sites may be similar in size, was very different. And, and there wasn't really data. And that was what the tool was supposed to bring forth, is like an evidence-based, data-based technology. Like, okay, if it's this, then we probably need this many people here. And if we don't, then what's the reason why, or do we need more? Does that make sense?
It does. And your audit found that this tool wasn't fully validated or consistently used. What broke down in getting it from development to actual deployment?
Basically, disagreements, plain old relationships between the developers and the end users. Primarily, it was whether it was right, whether it was complete, whether it had the information. Between 2019, I think this is in our audit report, between 2019 and 2023, there was data collection, testing, and presentations, but when they got the draft version, they couldn't agree. The stakeholders who were involved in it just couldn't agree how it was supposed to work. And so it really came down to just not agreeing how it was supposed to work. And so basically they just stopped working on it.
Cheryl Mason is the Inspector General for the Department of Veterans Affairs. So one of the themes that your report brings out then is governance. Who's got which roles and responsibilities? Who's empowered to make decisions? Who was supposed to own this effort?
Well, that was the challenge. At the time, it was dispersed throughout the VHA facilities. And even though there was police chiefs on the facilities, and we did have Office of Security, they really didn't own it. And it wasn't until they recently established the Assistant Secretary back in that Office of Security and Protection they put ownership back there now. That's who should have owned it. That's who can manage and control it. And I think you saw that probably in the Secretary's announcement the day before yesterday, I believe, about that they're working to fix the tool to have the governance and the responsibility sit with one person who's in charge of that. And that was our recommendation, because it was just dispersed across the country.
Governance has been a documented issue in other VA IT systems. Are there agency-wide lessons that you hope are getting distributed around this?
Yes, actually. And, that was interesting. I was at a meeting this morning and this topic came up, and that was the very conversation, is as a result of many of our OIG reports, really in the past, I would say, year, there has been more responsiveness to areas of governance and oversight that hadn't been looked at before, and implementing not only our recommendations, but also trying to figure out, okay, what else do we have to do? Let's get ahead of it. Let's make sure we're thinking about it. And so, when you don't have anyone, if nobody has accountability, or if everyone has accountability, then no one has accountability. And so I think that's kind of what happened here. So I think it is a lesson learned in not only this area, but across the department.
You also mentioned sort of an organizational solution, establishment of the Office of Operations Security and Preparedness as a standalone organization. It has its own assistant secretary and now responsibility for this tool. How do you think that will change development of the tool going forward?
Well, I know in our discussions with them, they've been really leaning forward. When I got here, this report had kind of been sitting around and they were trying to figure out what to do with it because they felt it was a good report, but they weren't sure what to do. So in speaking with the department, we said, well, does this make sense? And that was when they basically brought the assistant secretary and OSP back. So there was an assistant secretary that existed in that role prior to, I think, 2016. And so they brought it back in. So I think putting that central responsibility and accountability in one place, but also, the engagement we've had with them, they're definitely leaning forward. They want our engagement on this, and they want to make sure that they're, what we see, because we see it not only in the police staffing, but we see it when we go to different facilities, right? And so they want us to work with them on this. So I think we're already seeing the fruits of that in the secretary's announcement and some other changes that have gone about.
VA police staffing has been a concern for a long time. Shortages at many facilities, incidents that pop up. So as you're thinking about this new organization and as you're relooking this program, is there a sense that it will be reshaped now that you know what you know as a result of this report?
I do think it will be reshaped. Our report really discussed potential vulnerabilities with the tool, right? And the hiccup was in the development process. But as we looked at that, other things came about. And so, the concerns from the end users were really brought more into play. And so the concern here was it wasn't built in such a way initially where it could be used operationally. And they have made some changes to that, it now being in that place. And so I think it will better position the department, as we're seeing, to utilize where the recruitment needs to occur and how they go about that and the ways, what they need where. And then, look at that from a operational position from headquarters, but also get the input from the local areas, because it has to be the communication back and forth.
The report itself makes 4 recommendations. How are you feeling about the VA's response to those recommendations and activity that's moving them in the right direction?
We're monitoring. That's what we monitor. That's what we do. I think that, the Secretary's announcement is a good step forward in this. And I think that will go a long way. I mean, we definitely weren't expecting it to happen as quickly as it did, which is good. I think that shows commitment. And I also, the ongoing communication with VAOIG and OSP is very good in this realm, because additionally, as you probably are aware, VAOIG special agents work very closely with VA police because we have authority on the campuses for certain activities, certain crimes and activities that we're doing. And so really for us, we have an investment here. And so we want to ensure, like we do with all of our VA reports, but definitely because we're working hand in hand with them. So I think we are seeing movement in the right direction. Definitely it's been responsive. The department is responsive at all levels, from, the local police chiefs all the way up to the secretary.
And now that the program is moving back to being on track, is there a timeline that you're looking at, interim steps to kind of make sure we don't revisit this in a few more years and find it in the same state?
We usually, generally after a report comes out, we really check on it about at the 90 days point, unless they come back to us and tell us, hey, we've done this. Can you close this part of the recommendation? And the department is doing more of that, which has not been a routine practice, past practice. So, we'll do the 90-day check. But like I said, with our ongoing engagement, I think we'll probably have more of a sense. And so if we start to see things go off the rails a little bit, we'll have those stronger conversations with them, because again, this was an audit report, but our agents are very much engaged, and the protection of our veterans to go get services is paramount of importance to us and to the department.
Cheryl Mason is the Inspector General for the Department of Veterans Affairs. Thank you so much for walking us through this report.
Sure. Happy to.
We'll post this interview and a link to the report at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, North Carolina's Chief Information Security Officer has a simple rule before adding another cyber tool. Define the problem first. But first, runways, hangars, seawalls, and military facilities all start with the same thing: concrete. A former Air Force commander says that's worth paying attention to. You're listening to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Supply chain discussions usually focus on advanced technologies. Retired Brigadier General John Teichert says policymakers should pay more attention to a far more basic input: cement. He argues that growing reliance on imports could create risks for military and critical infrastructure projects. And he spoke with Federal News Network's Eric White.
So we're talking about kind of a bit of an oversight and something that you have personal experience in, and that is the growing reliance on imported cement for military and critical construction projects. This is something that I guess a lot of us just take for granted and you don't really think about. You think of cement as almost like a just dirt or sand or something like that, but it is actually something that has to be manufactured and created. What kind of put up the red flag for you to get involved with this?
Eric, that it breaks my heart that this thing that maybe is taken for granted or that is so foundational to everything that we do is actually an oversight in how we're dealing with it at the policy level in the United States. About 500,000 jobs in the United States are supported by the cement industry. It's a $130 billion industry. But just in the last decade and a half, we have gone from importing something like 7% of our cement needs in this country to now over 22%. And that imported amount is typically not safe or not reliable or not responsive to the fundamental needs that we have in this country. And I really hope to explain to your listeners how cement is literally under our feet every single day. And we need to make sure that the policy matches the necessary foundational elements of our country, and cement is at the top of that list.
Okay, so, when you're talking about military and critical construction projects, particularly on military bases, what are those? I mean, obviously, you just need the stuff to stay still, right? But are there unique designing issues that come into play here if you don't have cement that is mixed properly or, may have ingredients in it that aren't up to snub? What is the issue there, particularly when it comes to military bases?
Well, so I love broadening it as wide as possible. And while military bases are absolutely important in my bread and butter, but we need, as we build out additional runways, as we build out hardened facilities, as we have this boom in domestic industrial capacity that is military related, all of that requires cement. And I think it's important to realize that we have seen horror stories, even just in the last several years, of some basic fundamental or foundational elements of construction that come from overseas that are either not responsive, not reliable, or unsafe. And the one that I like to point out is toxic drywall from China that infects 100,000 or more U.S. homes because it was just shoddy construction, or that it didn't have the right regulation to make sure that it met the needs in the United States. And all of the things that we hope to do as a nation and as a military require building that is robust, and that robust building is all resting on good, sound cement, or if it's not, then the foundations will crumble.
Gotcha. Okay. So in your personal experience, you've been there before. You're managing a budget and you're trying to keep things under budget because nobody, even though there's a lot of them, everyone's trying to make sure that the dollars go the furthest that they can. Do you foresee that it is a policy decision that to go with what is probably the cheaper option, which is why it's being brought in more, that is the case? Or is there something else that makes it easier for somebody who used to be in your shoes to go with that option because of just whether it's the money aspect or convenience? What is it?
Eric, I think it's important to go back to how American workers in the cement industry or any industry will win if we can compete on a level playing field. And I think the biggest reason why we've seen that huge spike or increase in the percentage of our cement needs that come from foreign sources is because the American worker is not competing on a level playing field. And the two things that I and we are asking for, number one, revolves around that federal law that's Buy America, Build America, and the idea that that supports foundational elements like iron and steel, but cement was omitted from that federal legislation, which means we almost got it right, but not quite. And that allows the cement industry, if it was incorporated into Build America, Buy America, to have the same benefits, especially in federal procurement, as iron and steel does. And so that would help drive the market forces for more domestic capacity. But then the other piece of this is something that is rectified, I think, through a Section 301 investigation, which is where our federal government takes a step back and looks at anti-competitive practices being done in foreign companies that are dumping cheap, low-quality cement into the United States, and then creating the right policy prescriptions to level the playing field. And if we have both cement incorporated into Build America, Buy America, and the right policy prescriptions that come from a Section 301 investigation, then now we're creating that level playing field where I know that the American worker can compete and win. And again, going back to the economic impact here, I'm talking about $130 billion a year of economic activity through the cement industry in the United States and over 500,000 jobs. And those American workers and those American companies will win if we're given a fair playing field.
We're speaking with retired Air Force Brigadier General John Teichert, now with American Foundations. Why do you think it wasn't included in that Buy America, Build America policy measure? Because is it, like you said in your first answer, where it's just something really not thought about, just how integral it is to, building is the actual cement? Is it just, like you said, it's something you don't really think about because you're walking on it every day?
No, I think that's exactly right. And, when you think about the issues that really get you going, I'm an aviation guy. I love airplanes, and there's other industries out there. And even iron and steel tend to attract the attention more than something that is so basic, that's so taken for granted, like cement, because it's literally under our feet at every given moment. By the way, it's also the foundation, literally and figuratively, of the American dream as we try to build homes to meet the demand with supply. And I just think it was an oversight because it is so basic that it is taken for granted. But those members of the cement industry and all of us that rely on good quality, safe, reliable, and responsive cement need to rectify that by including it in something like Build America, Buy America.
There has been a lot of emphasis on supply chain security, particularly in the Defense Department. I'm thinking, because of the possible measures of infiltration that can occur when you go down to the nuts and bolts. I'm thinking the solar winds hack and all of that measure. What is the national security implication here as a former member of the Defense Department yourself? What is the threat there if there is a vulnerability when it comes to building supply chains?
Absolutely. And one of the things I already shared with you was the story about toxic drywall coming from China. And now you are infecting the community that uses that drywall. But then there's also the lack of high quality standards. A lot of these countries that produce the cement that we import either don't protect their own workers like we would in America. That means we're doing an overall net harm to humanity. They also don't have the same level of regulations either for quality or for environmental safety with respect to how they produce. And so now you're either introducing toxins or you're introducing material that can literally crumble under our feet. And from a national security standpoint, we need hardened facilities, but we also need the basic infrastructure to land airplanes and to roll tanks. And by the way, when we need to deploy, then we either do so on roads or on railways, and all of those are underpinned by cement. And then there's one other topic that I want to share with you, which is the huge economic driver of the growth of data centers and AI. And all of those centers require a large dose of cement. And again, if it starts to crumble or it introduces toxins, then now we lose the primary economic driver of the next decade, if not the next century.
Retired Air Force Brigadier General John Teichert is with American Foundations out there pounding the pavement on this topic. I want to thank you so much for joining us.
You got it. I'm going to use that line, pounding the pavement. I love it. And thanks for having me, Eric.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up next, North Carolina's Chief Information Security Officer has a simple rule before adding another cyber tool. Define the problem first. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Technology can expand capability, but it can also add complexity. North Carolina Chief Information Security Officer Bernice Russell Bond says every new cyber tool should start with the same question: what problem are we trying to solve? She spoke with Federal News Network's executive editor Jason Miller about her guiding cyber principles.
Is really looking at our tool inventory, right? And to do that from a kind of like a cyber or a security architectural perspective, right? If you're looking at your protect, detect, and so forth, that cyber framework, what are the tools we're using for each of those? What are the tools we're using for on-prem? What are the tools we're using for cloud, so forth, so on, from a physical perspective to see what we have and what was the purpose of it. And then really looking at what are those capabilities of those tools, because vendors are including more all the time, more capabilities. And so it's important. I challenge my team and peers to say, okay, what is the problem we're trying to solve? What are we trying to solution, short term and long term, because that can impact the product you go with. I would say that a number of times people look at, okay, I need to fix something. And so they buy one tool to fix something. But if you look at solutioning a process or a problem, you may go to a different solution. So we're doing that. We're saying, okay, what tool has these particular capabilities? What capabilities aren't we using that we should be? What capabilities do we not need anymore? And I'll stop there to say that I truly believe that if you're secure, you will be compliant. Compliancy does not mean security. So there's some tools out there that were acquired to be compliant. And I'm like, well, do we really need it? So it's looking to say, what don't we need? What is causing friction in our environment? And making those choices, whether we want to continue with those or not. And so again, I'm a firm believer that should be an annual process to look to see, are we mitigating risk? Are we improving the user experience with the way a tool works? And based off those answers will help you narrow down the tools that are making an impact and reducing the risk, unauthorized access, the risk of, just having data loss and so forth. So it's really looking at those, holding some accountability with our vendors, because I firmly also believe there's a difference between a vendor and a partner. Those partners we need to talk about, we need to understand what's coming with new additions to their product and say, hey, does that work for us? Does that help us to reduce our footprint somewhere else? And so those are the exercises we go through.
I always loved asking this question. Have you found anything that you didn't realize you had, and then you were like, oh my, we're still using that tool from 1998? I'll pick a good year for me. Or have you found anything where you're like, hey, this tool is great, but we're only using 10% of the capabilities. Let's turn that up to 80% or 100%.
Absolutely. So both scenarios, I would say yes. There are some things I'm like, why do we still have that? Well, we're doing it because we always have. I'm like, well, what risk is being mitigated? Well, not really. Okay, well, I don't think we need that anymore, right? And then you're 100% too, because as we start saying, what are all the capabilities? Because again, folks will say, hey, we need this. All right, well, what do we have so far? Does it have those capabilities? And then when you start looking like, oh, wow, they actually have this over here. So we don't need to purchase a net new. It's just, and in some scenarios, it's something we're paying for already. We just haven't enabled, right? And so it's finding those little jewels. I'll call them jewels. You love those opportunities where you can incorporate something that you have currently. And then you start talking about your true gaps, right? And because we're all trying to be fiscally responsible, and we want to make sure when we're spending funds that that's really needed and it's not something we have in the back of our closet and forgot about, or you never opened a box, right? And so both of those scenarios have happened, and that's why we're being very, I'll say, intentional with our partners to say what capabilities you have, show us which ones we're using today, show us which ones we're paying for but aren't using, and then also those that are we haven't purchased but you do have, so we can make really intentional decisions about our footprint with different products.
You brought up the funding issue. I think that's the other side of this. There's this push to invest in tools, but all those tools have licenses or costs of somehow, or to your point, if they're software as a service. Yeah. And you have to say, okay, can we afford all these things? And do we have too many? Because that also adds complexity to the entire effort. And I've never met someone in government, federal or state and local, who said, I have plenty of money. I can just make it rain on cyber tools. So I appreciate the fact you brought that piece up, because that sometimes also gets lost in this conversation. Bernice, one of the things you're really getting to is governance. And you mentioned that as one of your strategic priorities, one of your goals. How does this fall into the bigger discussion around governance of saying, what tools do we have? What tools do we need? What problem are we trying to solve? I'd even ask you, maybe even take a bigger step back. What does the governance process look like in North Carolina around IT cybersecurity?
It starts with our policies and having that framework that we can reference that people are aware of from a security perspective. And then then I'll go quickly and come back to it also comes to about awareness, right? Awareness and communication, because people have to know what we're trying to do, where we're trying to go, so that it's measurable. So, and the reason why I pick up measurable is because a number of times we may have goals, but we don't know whether we're being successful or not, or do we need to pivot? So I really think it's important with any governance framework or any type of initiative, you have to say, what is the intention? So either what are we able to do to support the business to do better, or what risk are we preventing, or what threat are we preventing? And so the governance is trying to explain, trying to give guardrails that we should be working in collectively to enable North Carolina to do something from a technological perspective to help our citizens do it securely, and ensuring that there's trust. I think it's really big to use that word, and that we are working together and not against each other, right? So again, that governance is about transparency, of being on the same page, and what we're really trying to do from a state perspective to protect our systems and our data. The other piece of it is also, I'll make a little touchy topic to say what is optional and what isn't. A lot of times folks say, well, that doesn't apply to me, or this doesn't apply to me. And that governance is trying to make it really clear what is applicable from a statewide perspective. What our expectations are, again, how you may get there, there's the flexibility, but from a governance, this is what's being communicated, expected from our state CIO, who I report to, right? And then as a state CISO, how I think we can get there at the end of the day to support, our governor's goals from a protection, data protection and cyber perspective.
Bernice Russell Bond is the Chief Information Security Officer for North Carolina, speaking there with Federal News Network's Executive Editor, Jason Miller. You can find their full conversation at federalnewsnetwork.com. Search Ask the CIO. Federal employees have recently scored a few small victories in their quest to restore telework. 2 Justice Department attorneys with disabilities will be able to telework as their lawsuit against DOJ continues. And an independent arbitrator has sided with the union in a case involving telework at the Forest Service. Here with a recap on the return to office situation is Federal News Network's Drew Friedman. Drew, thanks for being here.
Nice to be back with you today, Terry.
All right. Well, telework is always a hot topic, so let's start with the situation at the Forest Service. What led up to this grievance around the agency's return to office policy?
Well, of course, all of this really ties back to President Trump's Day 1 executive order last year, where he said that agencies should cancel all of their telework and remote work agreements, of course, consistent with applicable law, and just return employees to the office full time. So since that happened and through the spring of 2025, as agencies were bringing employees back to the office, we've seen a number of complaints and grievances and unfair labor practice charges come from federal unions as those took place, because a lot of unions do have telework as a provision in their collective bargaining agreements. So that means that from the union's perspective, negotiations and bargaining has to take place before there are any significant changes to return to office or telework policy. So in this case at the Forest Service, this deals with the National Federation of Federal Employees, which covers about 20,000 Forest Service workers. After the Forest Service implemented their return to office policies and broadly rescinded telework agreements, the union was pretty quick to file a grievance and an unfair labor practice charge, just arguing that the return to office orders violated both federal statute and their collective bargaining agreement. So that is really the basis of where this is all coming from now.
And the arbitrator was brought in because the collective bargaining agreement was still in place?
That's exactly right. That was going to stay in effect until June of 2029. So it's still technically in effect. And the arbitrator came out with a decision just recently saying that essentially siding with the union and saying that the Forest Service did breach their contract. And they ordered the Forest Service to restore telework and remote work agreements for the agency. That doesn't necessarily mean that's going to take place right away, because the Forest Service still does get 30 days to potentially appeal that decision from the arbitrator. We've seen a number of other cases like those at the Social Security Administration, Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, where you've had the unions pushing back against return to office and having similar decisions from the arbitrator. But then SSA and HUD both did appeal those decisions, so they're still kind of in limbo over at those agencies. We haven't seen what the Forest Service yet is going to do with this arbitration decision, but I would say if you look at some of the other examples here, it's pretty likely that they're going to appeal this.
And if they appeal, where does that case go?
It would go to the Federal Labor Relations Authority, or FLRA. So this is, of course, not a done deal, but on the small chance that they might not appeal, the arbitrator did order telework and remote work to be restored, and they also called for the Forest Service to essentially post a notice saying that admitting that it violated its contract with the union. Those are some of the orders in the decision that we saw just recently. But again, it'll just be a couple of weeks before we see the next steps in this case.
Well, there's also a legal battle going on over at the Department of Justice over telework agreements. So what are the employees' allegations there?
This is a slightly different scenario for these DOJ workers, and this is a lawsuit that involves two attorney advisors in one of DOJ's departments. They are suing DOJ because they believe that the department's return to office orders violate the Rehabilitation Act. This is something where we have seen a lot of cases pop up about concerns with agencies either delaying or denying reasonable accommodations requests to telework for a lot of employees. So this lawsuit comes from two plaintiffs who, one of them has type 1 diabetes with severe migraines, and another one has stage 4 lung cancer. They both say that being forced back into the office and having their telework agreements rescinded puts their health and even their lives in jeopardy and at risk. They have exhausted a lot of their sick and annual leave to try to work from home, but they say that the DOJ's blanket return to office policy has essentially violated their right to get reasonable accommodations because of their disabilities.
And their suit has had a ruling, correct?
That's right. There was a preliminary injunction in this case that now means that the two employees should be able to start teleworking again and have those agreements restored while their case continues. That ruling came from a federal judge in the Eastern District of Virginia, and this case is still pending and still going to take a while to fully litigate everything. But as that case continues, we are going to see those employees essentially get an opportunity to continue teleworking.
Do either of these cases then set precedent for other pending telework cases that may be out there?
Can't say for sure if it will set a precedent, but there are definitely a number of cases out there that are very similar. The Treasury Department and the IRS, as well as the Department of Health and Human Services, are also facing lawsuits from the National Treasury Employees Union, where you have concerns again over thousands of employees at those agencies who have either been denied their reasonable accommodations requests or have seen pretty significant delays. And this is for employees who have either disabilities or medical conditions that should allow them to work from home. So regardless of maybe which decision comes first, it's hard to say, but I would imagine that a lot of these, if you have one case settled in a certain way, it could potentially show what the pattern is going to be moving forward.
So still much to watch as these cases unfold.
Absolutely. I think it's going to be a while before we see any of this get resolved.
That's Federal News Network's Drew Friedman. Drew, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks so much, Terry.
You can find her story at federalnewsnetwork.com. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editor is Stephanie Wright. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.